So I'm really excited to have Tim Lensmire back to work with us again. He was at UWSP in March of 2019. Some of you may have participated. I think maybe Karin, you did in the book group on his book, White Folks, that we read in 2019. Okay, I don't know, you're a book group regular, so I was just taking a guess. And he offered to come and do a workshop. And I thought it'd be a really great opportunity to get folks, not just from UWSP, but also from the area and from the district involved too, because I know that people in the district are having a lot of these same conversations, and we really benefit when we can learn from each other, because in a lot of ways we have a lot of the same students just at different times. So I always find it really useful to hear from the K-12 instructors and find out what they know that I don't, because it's often a lot and it's stuff that's really helpful. So I'm excited about having this conversation together. So Tim is a professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Minnesota, although he's already confirmed he's not a Vikings fan, so we don't need to worry for those of you who are concerned about that. He got his PhD from Michigan State, but he is a graduate of UWSP, so that's where he got his bachelor's. He started out as a music major in undergrad. Me too. And then switched to elementary ed. And he's done a lot of work on taking a critical theory perspective to things like the teaching of writing, but also white racial identity, which is really what we're here to talk about today. Really thinking about how we can incorporate that into the ways that we sort of teach people about race and racism and identity, and also how we can, do that, especially through teacher development programs. I'm really excited because his book, White Folks, which he wrote just a couple of years ago, is about a town not too far from Stevens Point. So it's sort of an in our backyard ethnography. And I think it's extremely valuable on its own, but knowing this is about the people who are our students and our neighbors and our friends and our colleagues, I think gives it a lot of extra punch and weight and value to us specifically as an audience. So I just really appreciate that. So Tim, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you. I wish I could be there with you in person. I think that would be better, but this is good. This is good. I'm glad we can do it together. And I'd like to thank Lindsay for all of her work organizing this and just for helping us do this together. So as Lindsay mentioned, I grew up in a rural working class community, a little bit north of you. I still am trying to kind of protect the identities of the people that were kind enough to talk with me, I think pretty honestly about what they thought about themselves in relation to race in our country. And for white folks, as you know from reading tonight, I interviewed people from the community I grew up in. And the original plan for the book was that I would talk about 3 generations of white people. So I thought I would talk about people that were roughly my parents' age, roughly my age, and then roughly my oldest son's age. I interviewed 23, 24 people and from different generations. But as I got into the book, I decided I just wanted to write about the people that were roughly my generation. So Delores was the oldest of that group, and Frank was the youngest of that group. And so I was sort of in the middle of them. Delores was roughly 10 years older than me, and Frank was 10 years younger than me. In the book, I begin it actually with an Ojibwe flood story. And then very briefly, in kind of incredibly packed form, I try to tell a brief history of the place, starting kind of with the Ojibwe and then working through the German and Polish immigrants that came to that area up to the time kind of the book. And my purpose in doing that was just to counter a sort of white supremacist assumption that the story of a place begins when white people get there. So I was just trying to signal that the stories of the places that we are began before we got here. I'm not going to make any assumptions. So if you identify as a person of color, people of color often grow up in communities where they're used to talking about and theorizing not only race, but theorizing why white people are doing what they're doing. It's part of just figuring out how to move in the world. And so if you identify as a person of color, then I hope that this helps you continue that theorizing, and it supports your interpretation and helps you move with kind of power in the ways that you want to. For those of you who identify as white people, many of us grew up in communities where it was maybe impolite to talk about race, or sometimes even thought of as racist to talk about race. And so sometimes we're not as far along in figuring out not just how race works in our society, but how it works in us, and how it affects kind of both us as individuals and also in our relationships to other people. And so wherever you're at on that journey of figuring out kind of who you are and who you want to be in relation to our society and its structures and systems and schools, I hope tonight will just kind of help with that and maybe give you some more ways of thinking about your own place and who you are and who you want to be. So we're going to be doing a couple different things together. I'm going to just share the screen quick and get this going. I'll just give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing tonight. So we're going to take a little time for some introductions, and then I'm going to get you into a small group right away and ask you to just share some personal experiences with each other, just for a little bit in a breakout room. We'll talk a little bit more about Dolores' story that you read about in the chapter for tonight. We'll also do some work with Frank's discussion of what he thought were high and low spaces that he moved in, his experience. We'll talk a little bit about Frank's van story, and then we'll close just with any questions and anything you want to talk with me about in relation to the book or the work that I've been doing or that we do here together tonight. So let's just do some introductions, and we'll just do these fairly briefly. If you could just tell me or tell others too. I don't know that all of you know everybody else here, do you? Or does everybody know each other? Okay. So just share your name, and why don't you just share why you decided to do this? You know, what brought you here, right? There are other things you could do. You could be watching something on Netflix right now. So what made you decide that you wanted to join us tonight? So Lindsay, why don't you start off, and then let's see, okay, I can, yeah, if I run, I can call people then. All right, go ahead,
You can
Lindsay.
do whatever you want. You're the boss.
Yeah, well, okay, Lindsay, go.
Okay, so I'm Lindsay Bernhagen. I'm the director of the Center for Inclusive Teaching and Learning at UWSP. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am from Stevens Point originally, so it is always interesting for me to help me understand my sort of own journey, because now I'm sort of like actively anti-racist, and I've tumbled into this diversity work, and that's sort of what my whole career is about. And yet I came from this very homogenous white place and heard lots of the kinds of things that Tim writes about in his book. So I'm not even sure I fully understand that myself yet, how that happened or what my own journey was. And also I read Kathleen Kramer's Politics of Resentment a couple of years ago. If those of you who haven't read that book, it's about politics in Wisconsin, basically, and sort of how the same counties that are voted for Trump also voted for Obama, and like what is going on there. And that to me just taught me that there's so much that I don't understand about people who live very close to me, and I need to expand and deepen and make more complex my own understandings about all of these issues, so I can be a better teacher, but also just a better neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Lindsay. She didn't say she had to come, so she was forced to come. Yeah, too. All right, so on the screen, there's two people, but the name is Steve Schmidt. So could the two of you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Steve. I work at UWSP in the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education, and we're really trying to be honest and open and discussing race relations and incorporating that into our work in environmental education. And so I saw this and I immediately emailed it to Sally.
Hi, I'm Sally Schmidt, and I am a pediatric speech pathologist, and I am also a member of a church, and you'll meet some other people that I also invited to join this group, and we have recently started an anti-racist story time. And so it was kind of, when I got the invite, I shared it, and it was my interest is just in exploring that for myself so that I can continue to have those conversations with the kids in my life.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve and Sally.
And we have we have a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old who are listening and participating in that anti-racist story time. And so we want to get some more context for raising kids in this part of the world.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So the name I have on is Ann Warren, MT. So whoever belongs to that thing that
That would
pops
be
up
me.
on my screen. All right.
Hi, I'm Ann Warren. I work in the theater department here at UWSP. My interest in this course is beyond like a personal connection, like how I've raised my children
Mhm.
and the like, and small encounters, which I think are very important.
Yeah.
I finally feel like I'm in a position where I can start to make changes on a more far-reaching level in my work. I started recently working with stage managers, and the theater world's been called out on its underground racism of we like to talk big, and we certainly make a lot of money off of plays that show the hardship of Black folks, but we don't hire them. We don't present plays that are from that point of view and allow that voice to speak as itself, which I think is important to happen for a whole variety of reasons that I'm sure everybody sitting here can think of on their own. So being in that position, I really want to see what I can do to help that, because I think our industry is moving that direction, and to educate myself so that a change is coming, and I want to be part of that change.
Thank you. Thank you. I think your building now is a lot nicer than when I was there as a music major. So I'm a little jealous. When I've stopped there, it seems a lot nicer than when we were there. So, all right. Thank you. Next up, Jennifer Collins.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I teach political science at UWSP, and I was really interested in coming to this session because just, you know, I just, in my classes, you know, talk about, in some of the different classes, talk about a lot of issues. We've been talking about Black Lives Matter. And, you know, in my conversation with my students, there's, you know, a whole kind of range and of where they're coming from. And so I'm originally from New York. I'm not from the Midwest. And so I found it really interesting to read your book, and because, you know, through my conversations, trying to kind of better understand where some of my students are coming from, and how to kind of engage in conversations that allow them to feel comfortable and yet grapple with these really difficult issues. And I feel that part of that is we really do, I feel like, you know, I need to better understand the kind of white identity, and especially given, you know, all of the stuff that's going on in our country these days. You know, I just think this is so urgent. We've really got to better understand what is going on with white people, you know, with all of us, right? I include myself in that. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Alyssa.
Hi, I'm Alyssa. I work in the College of Natural Resources here at UWSP. And I think I'm trying to attend as many of these great events that CITL puts on, because I was raised in a predominantly white area in Wisconsin, and I was absolutely raised to don't talk about it and then it's not a problem. And I guess most of my life was in that I'm not a racist space, and I'm learning to be more anti-racist. And once I feel like I have a better understanding of all of these issues, I would certainly like to put that towards our college, which is a very white college, and see if I can make it a more welcoming space to students of color.
Thank you. Welcome. Karen, if that's said right, Heiler?
Actually, Karen.
Karen. Okay. Thank you, Karen.
I work at the university at UWSP. And I'm an administrative person. I'm not a teacher, but a lifelong student. I love all the programs Lindsay puts on, and I try to take advantage of them. I grew up in the 60s, and I was really scarred. I mean, I was 9 years old in 68. I mean, I remember the riots. I remember the Vietnam War. My dad was in the military. I remember the assassination of Martin Luther King. So I was scarred by all of that. And I'm just tired of what's going on. So I'm here to learn. I've tried, as I said, my dad was in the military, in the Air Force, and I was really lucky and got to live abroad. And I also had the military is, compared to society, was very diversified. I mean, I remember having friends of all different ethnic, racial backgrounds, but my parents were from Kenosha, and racial neighborhoods like the Swedish and the Polish and this and that. So on the one hand, I lived this life and was around a lot of different people, and then yet at home I would hear the comments, the racial, the jokes, and my educated father, and I was the one in the family who always protested, and so I'm just really tired, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. And I want to understand what's going on in our country. And I have a 26-year-old son who I was proud to march in Wausau at the Black Lives Matter march, and then I marched with Jennifer in the Black Lives Matter rally here in Stevens Point. I've so tried to live that, but yeah, so I'm tired. I'm really hoping to hear some insights and some inspiration. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we're going to come up with all the answers. And we know that you're tired, Karen. So
sorry.
No, that's good. I think we're all tired in different ways, right? We're all tired. You're just being honest. All right, Jody. Let's see. I don't think there's two. Jody.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jody.
Lindsay can share, and a lot of the folks that are on this today, we've been involved with the various how to be an anti-racist and white, the various different books about white privilege. I don't think I've ever really shared necessarily a lot about my personal background. I was physically born in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, but my parents moved all over the country. It just happened I came 9 months to the day from their wedding anniversary. So they were up north and I was born. But with living all over the country, we moved like every 6 months. And when I say we, my sister and my sister's 3 years younger than I am. We had a broad range of friends. We had to be flexible and adaptable. We had to be, open-minded. You really had to be able to adapt to different situations, and it was always a good thing. So I always have had a very broad, range of individuals, friends, family. I'm always surprised, as it turns out, me settling in this area, my mom and dad settled in the Wausau area for my sister and I to finish high school and to be in a stable environment for like that 4-year window. And then they moved during my sister's senior year. And I met my husband and fell in love. And 36 years later, the guys, we joke that we're gonna, if you hear about a murder up in Rothschild, it's one of us. But we agreed to disagree, and we're both very open-minded. We both had, a lot of friends. He went away to college as well as I did. And it's very intriguing to me, the student demographic that we serve. And I've also been fortunate enough to to serve and work in 3 other different colleges, private and public, small and large. And so it's been really interesting to me how I'm going to say that, like, say the central Wisconsin, let's say about an 80-mile radius, where there seems to be this fear and we have to stay here and we can't go anywhere. We're afraid to move. Oh my God, you'd go out to the West Coast. Oh, you'd move to Madison? Yeah, why not? Why wouldn't you? So there seems to be all that, as well as this, we won't talk about, race or what have you. And I wonder, it is, I've been thinking about it with some of the discussions we have been having. It makes me ponder if so much of what we hear and see and observe is rooted in all of this fear. And I think it's fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of somebody being different. And I think we peel our skin off. We're all human beings underneath, and we all have feelings, and we can all get hurt. So why can't we learn how to be respectful and kind and supportive, of everyone, without going, to the extremes of cultural misappropriation and so on. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, well, and
thanks for hosting us, Tim.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Welcome. We'll be talking about fear, right? Because Dolores' story has a different take on where fear is generated and what it's actually about. So we'll be talking about that. Yeah, thank you. Julie?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Julie Trombley. I am in Wausau, and I'm a part of the church group that Sally mentioned when she introduced herself. I'm the Director of Religious Education at First UU Wausau. And it became apparent to me probably about 4 years ago, and then it's taken me quite a bit of time and work to fully get on board, but that anti-racism work had to be a formal part of my ministry. So I am still, 4 years later, trying to learn everything I can. I love this opportunity and any opportunity to have these discussions because I want it to influence the work that I'm doing with children and youth and adults as well. So thank you. I'm excited to be here and be having the conversation.
Thanks, Julie. Let's see. Johnny Han, is that right? Is that some?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It's my first name and my last name.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is.
That's okay. You can change it. We can talk about that later. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's easy to change.
Probably some tech that I'm missing. Anyway, so the name is Joni.
Hi, Joni.
So I know we have.
But I will call you Johnny Han for the rest of the evening. All right.
All right, as long as we have that clear. I am a retired preschool teacher for the Merrill area public schools. And I am also one of the partners in crime with this church that you have now heard about that is doing an anti-racist storytelling time. And I'm enjoying that very much. For one thing, it's keeping me connected with kids. And I feel like it's work that it's an action that I can be involved in for anti-racism. And then the other part of being interested in tonight is just my own personal journey, being that I grew up in a white rural community in Wisconsin. I was born in Marinette and I've spent my adult life in Merrill. So I just have a lot of personal growth that I'm interested in.
Thank you. Welcome. I'll call you Joni. It's okay. Yeah. Welcome. All right. And finally, Kathy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Barbier, and I'm a teacher in the Point School District. So I teach at a charter school, and I teach middle school through high school. So right now I have 6th graders through 10th graders. I teach literacy. So I've just been trying to, I guess it's kind of probably, I taught in Philadelphia, I taught in inner city Philadelphia. So the race has kind of always been dear to my heart as far as trying to educate myself and bring literature to students and have discussions. And so I'm just really also trying to find ways to have discussions with students, think about my own background and the own very white neighborhood that I grew up in and my family dynamics and kind of so on personal level and also as a teacher, how I can mesh these two. A lot of what we do in our school is really a lot of social justice issues. And this year, like we're looking at a lot of US history and kind of looking at it through the lens of what is the American dream? What is the dream for America? You know, like with a lot of our books that we're reading and working with the social studies and history teacher. Yeah, so I'm kind of just jumping at every chance to be involved in some conversations or some readings or some professional development. The district's doing some professional development groups as well. So I'm pretty excited to just be here. But I am also everything that my students and I feel like I'm reading is so heavy lately. And you know, it's getting a little heavy for me. So, because it's so intense. They're living in this world. They're you know, virtually learning. The books and the topics we're talking about are so heavy. So it's also weighing on me emotionally a little bit. So I'm trying to balance the both, you know. And also I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. So just trying to help them, raise them as anti-racist and you know, fighters for the social justice and the good of all. So
thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Welcome. Welcome. All right, so let's, the first up, I'm gonna just send you into a breakout room just with a couple people. And all I'm gonna ask you to do there right now is to, let's see, I can just share my screen here, is to talk a little bit with each other about, let's see, I'd like you to share an experience in which race mattered, all right? And if possible, if you can go back to a first or an early time that you remember, but it's not required, all right? So it's just to try to remember an experience where in the situation you realize somehow race mattered to the situation. And this was the kind of question that that Delores was responding to. So when she started telling the stories about what it was like for her as a young person at a different one than UWSP, but in a Wisconsin system, teachers college. This is how she responded. You know, her stories were in response to this question. And if you have time, I'm going to put you in for a little bit less than 10 minutes. Probably you can assume 7-8 minutes. So just share some personal experiences and then begin trying to make sense of what you think they mean, okay? So begin interpreting them, or what's at stake, or what are the morals of the story that are there. And one of my concerns is that so often, and I'll talk a little bit more about why I think, some of the reasons I think this is, so often when we tell stories or read stories, we only are interested in them long enough to identify something racist in them, right? And then we stop thinking. But stories are always more complex than that. Stories are always have multiple things going on. So don't stop with just identifying what, if you think there was something racist going on, try to figure out other things that were going on in those experiences. Because I think a lot of time in our anti-racist efforts, ironically, in our focus on race, we sometimes undermine our own ability to actually do anti-racist work. So share some stories, all right? Talk a little bit about experiences where you realize that race somehow was important, and then just begin trying to make sense of them a little bit. Okay, and I'll call you back. When we come back, I'm not going to ask you to share out this time, all right? So this is just to kind of get some storytelling going and share some experiences, all right? So let's see, I'm going to put you, so you'll be either with 2 other people or 1 other person, okay? So let me do this quick. Breakout rooms. Okay, do 4 of that. Okay, I will see you in 7-8 minutes, okay? All right. Okay. Welcome back. So Julie, I was going to ask, have you run into the Reverend Thandeka's work before?
No, that is not a
Okay.
name that I'm familiar with.
She's she's a Universalist Unitarian theologian.
Oh.
So yeah.
I'm gonna have to do some research.
Yeah, I'll afterwards I'll share a piece that she wrote specifically to her congregation about anti-racist work that maybe you'll find interesting. So,
I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Everybody's coming back. Welcome back. Okay, like I said, we're not going to work with and share what you started in this small breakout room. You'll have a chance to continue building on this later. I'm going to keep you in the same kind of groups as we continue going. Okay. So for right now, what I want to do is I want to move into talking a little bit about Delores' story and just highlighting a few things about it. And what I want to bring out is specifically what I think the Reverend Thandeka's work helps us understand about Delores' experiences and the experiences of many what she would call pre-white children and youth. So Thandeka has what I think of as one of the most important books written on race and racism, the Learning to Be White book, and I would really recommend it for anybody that wants kind of an alternative way of trying to understand what's going on with white people in relation to race and racism. So Thandeka thinks that white racial identity is produced in the racial abuse by white adults of their own children. And she thinks of this in this story that she tells about sort of the intimate relationships of children and youth with adults. She would say in the beginning, there's desire, right? In the beginning, there's desire. and children's desires don't stay within the boundaries or the hierarchies, right, of our society. So they may very well find themselves desiring friendship and love and solidarity with people or with ideas, you know, and images and music and art that goes outside of the white community. But often white children and youth experience adult disapproval. And sometimes it's not explicit, but disapproval of this kind of expansiveness of their desire. And children and youth then are left with this choice of, they get the feeling that they have some sense that they may very well be abandoned or exiled in some sense, or not be loved if they keep persisting in their desires for connection and friendship and love that would go outside of the white community. And for Thandeka, that's the beginning of white racial identity. And if we read that in Dolores's story, right? Delores is at a studying teacher education at a place very much like the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. All around her are protests, anti-war protests, and civil rights protests. And she finds herself morally agreeing with the people that are protesting for civil rights. But she, you know, pursues what she calls being a bystander. And as I tried to make sense of her story, at the center or at the base of this story is a fear that she will lose the support and love of her family if she does what she thinks is morally right, which would be to stand with the civil rights protesters. And so using Thandeka's story, kind of conception of white racial identity, Delores is learning, even if she doesn't understand as a young person everything that's happening, she's learning that her own whiteness is conditional, right? She could be, in some sense, kicked out of the white community and lose the love and support of the people she needs if she persisted in kind of desiring friendship and solidarity with Black people. And Thandeka says that white children then become white adults with this deep unnamed confusion and shame about race, because lots of times it's not so explicit what this is about. And that's why, if you remember in the chapter, Jack's story that Thandeka retells, where he's a 5-year-old, right, excited about his birthday party, and he calls to his friends to come, you know, and I imagine this little white guy with his 2 Black friends weaving among all the kind of white bodies that are there for Jack's birthday. And he knows that there's something wrong, and he knows that there's something wrong that has to do with his friends, his Black friends, but he doesn't understand what that's about. And so for Thandeka, it's those sorts of experiences that start producing a white racial identity that leads to then also white adults not wanting to return to that, right? So she would say sometimes when white adults don't want to talk about race, they don't want to do that because it returns them to this painful moment when they learned that they may not be loved unconditionally by their parents, and that they may not actually have the support of the people they thought they had the support of. So the question then becomes, why would white adults do this to their children, right? Why would this happen? And this is where Thandeka draws on historical work, especially work by people like David Roediger, who's a white historian. Roediger's work would be based on W.E.B. Du Bois's work, where in Black Reconstruction in the South, Du Bois was trying to make sense of why white working people didn't stand with Black working people and kind of take on white elites after the Civil War. And so Thandeka draws on this historical work to answer this question about why would white adults and why would white communities do this to their own children. And her answer is that the origins of this abuse has to do with the fear of white elites, that white working people would stand with people of color. And so white elites have learned over time Du Bois calls it like they've developed a method, a kind of cunning method over time, a way to divide and conquer, right? So they figure out that if they give small privileges to white, regular white folks, right? If they give small privileges to them, like they can attend public schools, they can vote. If they give them these small privileges, white working people will embrace the idea that they're better than Black people, right? But within this scheme, they also always learn that they're not as good, right, as the really good white people, which are the white elites, right? So in this scheme, just regular white folks need to continually prove that they're white enough. And we can understand in a system like this, in a white supremacist system like this, where white elites have figured out that they can offer some privileges to regular white people, that white adults would have great anxiety that their own children might not grow up to be white enough, right? And may very well not enjoy the benefits of the society and may be punished, right, if they continue standing with people of color. So this is the backdrop that I use for understanding Delores' story. And when I share Thandeka's work and also Delores' story with young white people in my classes, in my undergraduate and graduate classes, in the beginning they say like, oh, that sounds like old stuff. You know, I don't think, maybe that happened to my parents, but it's not happening to us, right? And then the next week they come back and then they just start telling stories. Like the young white women start telling stories about how they thought that their parents were very open-minded and liberal, and then they brought a Black boyfriend home, and then they start realizing that there are these repetitions and these things happening again and again. So the last thing I want to say about that then is stories like Dolores's and Jack's in Thandeka's book, and then many other stories and people I've worked with, have led me to be pretty skeptical of white privilege, what I'll call white privilege frameworks. And so I have not met a white person in the last 10 years who didn't know about white privilege stuff, right? So white privilege stuff is everywhere, right? It's the main way in education that we talk about racism. I've had high schoolers say like, yeah, I don't have to talk about like whiteness. I've already read, you know, Peggy McIntosh's piece, right? So it's very much kind of in the air. A lot of people know about it, popularized by people like Peggy McIntosh and Tim Wise. There's many others. Some of the problems I have with a white privilege framework is not that white people don't, you know, somehow don't have white privilege. I'm not, it's an advantage to be white in our country, right? But I think it misunderstands white privilege as a cause rather than an effect of a white supremacist society. So our society is set up a way which grants white people privilege, right? White privilege isn't the cause of white supremacy. I think it also, the pedagogy that comes out of it often produces little more than tears and confessions from the people who are considered good white people and resistance from the bad white people. So this pedagogy tends to reward people who, you know, who will confess their privilege, and people who question the framework are labeled immediately that they would only be doing that because they're racist, right? And so I don't think that's a good thing. That's not a good way to work with people, that if you have questions that you're then called a racist. That's not a good thing. And then finally, and this is going to be the thing that I'll be talking about and we're going to be working through the rest of the night. I think a white privilege framework ignores the importance of white people's relationships with each other. So for somebody like Thandeka and Du Bois and Roediger, they would say that it's white people's relationship to other white people that generate then the violence that white people do against Black people, right? These systems set up, like, so on a social class level, right? White elites with regular white people, right? That relationship is what then encourages regular white people to do violence to Black people, right? The intimate relationship of adults with their own children, right, is generating in white children this idea that somehow there's something wrong with aligning themselves or being close to Black people, right? So a lot of action is going on among white people that is keeping our system in place. And so I think sometimes white privilege work doesn't pay any attention to what's going on among white people. It's only worried about the relationship of white people to Black people. So, all right, so let's kind of dig in then a little bit more into this idea. So I'm going to ask you to go back into your breakout groups. And this time, I want you to take up a set of questions inspired by Frank's account. So in the chapter, you read Frank's talking about the two main spaces he thought he moved in, right? He thought he moved in a high space and a low space. And the low space he associated with his poker game, right? That was in a basement. So sometimes he called it a basement space, right? And then the high space, he often talked about as what he experienced in school. He was a teacher, and he called that high space a politically correct space, right? And there were different characteristics of a high and a low space. In the high space, Frank talked a lot about hiding in that space, that even if he didn't think he had particularly racist ideas, he was confused about things, he didn't think you could say them in that space because he might be called a racist for asking questions or being confused or saying the wrong thing. In the low space, which seemed at first like it was a free space, and so you could say anything, it actually turned out the low space rewarded kind of extreme views, extreme racist views, sexist views, racist humor. And so the low space also wasn't a space where Frank could sort through and figure out what he thought about race. And so actually, according to Frank, in his own life, he had no place that he could work out what he thought about race. The high space and the low space were not places that he could do that. I am not claiming that Frank, is the greatest theorist of white people's lives in the history of the universe or anything, but I think he's pointing to something important, that white people move in different spaces, and that there's different sorts of rules and different things encouraged and different things discouraged in these different spaces. And so what I'd like you to do in your small group this time is I'd like you to take up two questions. I'd like you to talk a little bit about and explore what different social spaces characterize your life. And I'm not expecting that your accounts would be the same as Frank's, right? Even Frank knew that he was kind of simplifying, with just these two spaces. So, but I'd like you to explore a little bit, what are some of these social spaces that you move and spend your life in? And then I'd like you to do some analysis. How do and don't these particular spaces help you learn about and discuss and make sense of race and racism in your life? So what are how do these spaces encourage or not encourage, right? You talking about and figuring out and pushing forward what you know about race. And I'll give you about 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes or so to just start this conversation. And then we'll come back together and I'll ask you to share some of the things that you were working out in that, okay? So again, kind of jumping off of Frank's account of high and low spaces, explore some of the different social spaces you find yourself in, and then just start talking about how good are these spaces at either helping or hindering you from coming to understand yourself and our society better in relation to race. And I will put these, like I did the last time, I'll put these questions in the chat. So if you kind of forget them once you get into it, they'll be there for you, okay? All right, let's see, any questions before I have you jump into this? Okay, I'll see you in about 12, 13 minutes, okay? And I might I won't sneak. You can't sneak into breakout rooms. I'm sure you know that, but I may join a room or two this time, but I'm going to let you get started first. Okay. All right. So we'll see you in a little more than 10 minutes. Did something not work, Karen? Okay. All right. everybody else was, yeah, everybody else was still talking about things that they wanted to talk about. So I got us out early, so. Welcome back. Kathy, you're muted, just so you know. Okay. All right. Well, there'll be a couple more seconds and everyone will be popping back. So, all right. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to adjust my plan a little bit because we have a little less than 15 minutes left. And so we're going to just spend the rest of the time that we have sort of discussing things together. So why don't we start just hearing from people about maybe one interesting thing that came up in the breakout room, whether it was sort of officially on task or not, like just one interesting thing that came up that that you'd like to share with the larger group. And I'll just go ahead. We're a small enough group that we can adjust our talking with each other. So would somebody like to share something that came up in their group? All right, well, it's been nice. We'll see you next year. All right, bye-bye. All right, I know there were conversations going on because people didn't
talk. Come on,
people didn't drop out of their breakout rooms right away. So I know that you were talking. So, all right, was interesting too high of a bar? All right, so you don't have to share something interesting. How about share something mildly interesting that came up or sort of interesting?
All right,
not to brag. Okay, Johnny Hahn, what do you got?
Yeah, okay. So I'm hoping that maybe Julie will share too. She was talking about how we're not very nice to each other as white people. She was talking about being in a conversation group and how people were calling each other out for being racist. And it was a group of white people that were trying to talk about anti-racism. And the comment that we were making was, how is there ever going to be growth if we stop being vicious with each other?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Julie, I don't know if you have anything else.
I see this a lot. People nominate others. They'll say, okay, I'll talk. And then they just hand it off. All right.
Yeah.
It was handed off. Go ahead.
No, I just was explaining how the world of liberal religious education, I would definitely describe that as a high place in this way that we're describing things, and how I have seen on more than one occasion, like you say the wrong thing and you're just attacked. And it's not in a loving, kind, I want you to grow kind of way. It's in a, you're wrong, and how could you say something like that kind of way. So for me, it allows no room for growth because I'm terrified in that setting. Like, I'm never going to ask a question. I'm mostly going to be completely silent because I don't even want to say the wrong thing and be publicly shamed for it. So I really appreciate this framework because I've experienced that in these, how these like high places don't allow for learning and growth either, because there can be so much fear involved.
And judgment.
Yeah, judgment.
So, Anne Warren, you want to go?
Well, I think just kind of reflecting a bit, in my kind of lower spaces, we're quite comfortable with calling each other out on unacceptable behavior, but it's done with humor. And there's a sense of humor and warmth to it that doesn't exist in the higher space because of that formality. It's like, I can't crack a joke. I can't use rough language. I can't talk and present myself as myself, even if we're just talking about the weather, because I'm supposed to use certain language and I'm supposed to present myself in a very formal way. Whereas in my less formal situations, I can crack jokes with people. I can take their racism and flip it with humor in such a way that they know I still regard them well, but they're getting the message. And they do the same thing to me. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely,
yeah.
I think definitely Frank was, I think that was one of the things that Frank was puzzled by was, you know, how the low space, whatever was going on there, kind of, he did initially think it felt freer and I think warmer, like you're saying, but he also recognized that it wasn't, that particular one wasn't a place where he could be confused, right? He had to perform kind of finished, kind of racist and sexist sorts of things. To go back to, Julie a second. Julie, if you're interested, I wrote a paper on this situation like you just described, like worrying about what that meant for anti-racist work. And I didn't share in the readings that I shared with you for this time, I didn't share another theorist they use a lot is Ralph Ellison. And Ralph Ellison is usually known for Invisible Man, but I also use his essays in Shadow and Act and Going to the Territory. And he helps us understand how white people use scapegoating rituals to create themselves. In other words, you put other people down so you feel better about yourself or so you can think about the United States as a good place. And so, Julie, I wrote this piece where I realized that sometimes people who want to claim an anti-racist identity scapegoat other white people so they can look like the good white people. So I think what you're talking about is actually kind of a performance of anti-racism where you need other white people who are bad to prove that you're the good white person, right? And that's not gonna help us in this work, which is different than I think from what Anne Warren has been trying to, you know, figure out is how do we talk about these things in a kind of serious, open way? How do we work through what's actually meant by things? You know, how do we figure out the connection of talk to action, right? How do we do this in a way that is actually helps people learn, right? So, I mean, it's not like it's easy or something, but we can certainly point at something like what Julie was pointing to and just say like, that's not going to help. That's not going to help. If we're using other white people to create our own identity as a better white person, that's just not going to help. We're not standing in solidarity then. So, all right, some other mildly interesting, you know, things that came up. At least one more maybe. And if you want to nominate somebody else, like that's a slick move, you know, if you know, like if you want to point at somebody else, that's a slick move.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we the three of us kind of got a little stymied on this question, but we did talk a little bit about kind of our work environment as kind of, you know, a high space and then, you know, kind of more our personal lives, a more informal space and with friends and, you know, and a freer sort of environment that way. And I think all three of us kind of shared that. And then Jody also was very interesting personal story of her involvement in with the Ho-Chunk Nation and involved in a church there and that kind of cross-cultural experience. And so that was very interesting. So, and I guess, you know, I thought it was really interesting when Julie was talking, when I think about like my own classes, and I always, you know, I kind of struggle with when whites, you know, when we're talking about something like, you know, Black Lives Matter, we were talking about defund the police recently, you know, and there's a, you know, and I had some students who, I mean, the majority of the students in this particular class were, you know, very supportive of, you know, Black Lives Matter. But I definitely had, you know, some other students who were you know, really going after the whole idea of defund the police. And some of it was just kind of like, you know, they were creating the whole thing as this much more extreme than it really was, and you know, and therefore discrediting it. And so kind of struggling with, you know, when I heard Julie talking, you know, how do you, when, you know, how do you respond and in order not to cut off the conversation, and you know, and to but to also be able to say sometimes, well, you know, what about this, right? You know, and not just sort of let things go. So, you know, that's, I think, always a struggle, right? Because you don't want to, right? You don't want to criticize, you know, you don't want to make somebody feel like they're under attack. But you do want to be able to have a really kind of honest conversation if you know, hear something in what somebody's saying. And so I think we all struggle with how to do that, you know, it's challenging.
It is. It is. I literally had it in a class happen on, you know, on Tuesday and it was literally about two people in a row in this conversation were talking about their experiences of their grandfathers who were very poor white people. And then they got called out by another white person for, like, we're supposed to be talking about the experiences of Black people, and why are we talking about white people? You know, so there's real complications here. That's why we have to know history too. You know, like another person I really like is Matthew Jacobson. It's called a book called Whiteness of a Different Color. And he does a terrific job of tracing how, on the one hand, it's always been an advantage to be a white person in the United States, and he's a historian and he traces it. But he also says there have been horrific struggles among different groups of white people. And for people who were marginalized white groups, right, that we shouldn't make believe that those struggles weren't real. It's just that those struggles often led to them being accepted, right, eventually as white people, right? So the struggle led to kind of them being invited into being white people. So yeah, we have to figure out how to move through those. One rule I just use, and I, you know, imposed it on you, is I really try not to ever have conversations about this stuff without people reading, because I don't know why we think magically something different is going to happen when we have so much trouble just starting these conversations and having them. So at least if you have something to point at, you know, you can say, like, I think Frank was a fool, or I think Frank was smart, and you can, you know, and you can start there, and you can work out from there. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion.
yeah. We have a couple more minutes, so I guess I'll field any questions that any of you would like to take, or if you'd like to ask a question of each other, that's fine too. Any questions? Yes. Even on Zoom, we know that we should raise our hand. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, just curious to know sort of how you approach, and I've had, and this is particularly with male students, white male students, this, and it is kind of a sense of, not with all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but I've definitely had these interactions with some of, you know, again, of this kind of, I don't want to say victimization, but you know, kind of, and how to kind of respond to that. And I do listen, I really, and I do, and I also do, I think it is really important. I really like your emphasis on kind of thinking about our own stories and thinking about, you know, the ways in which we as white people have, you know, have also, to some degree, this racism comes from, you know, the abuse. I thought that was really interesting. But, you know, how to sort of have these conversations. And I think, and I do find it much more to be with kind of white men students, again, this kind of sense like, well, why, you know, yeah, you get what I'm talking about.
Well, I mean, so first of all, like we're up against it with that, right? So the first thing I would just say is young white men have, you know, their whole lives heard other white men saying that white men are the victims now in our society, right? So there's a long, like going back to like Bork and like, I mean, certainly back to the 80s, right? We've got almost 40 years now of white conservatives practicing this storyline that the true victims in our society are white men, right? And that's against feminists and that's against Black people, right? So that's a storyline, right? So that's there, and they're often repeating it. To make it more complicated, right, however, is when white men come into white privilege work, right? It wouldn't matter if they're maybe actually poor and rural. Nobody's paying attention to that. Maybe, you know, maybe their lives don't play out exactly like they did for Peggy McIntosh, right? So I think we have to figure out, just, you know, try to get a bead on what we're up against, right? And then sometimes you're going to decide like this isn't worth the struggle with them. And other times you're going to say, okay, I got to tap them into maybe historical work that understands how white men have, especially working white men, have been used as the violent hand of white elites. And then you can give these white men, these young white men, a choice and say, well, do you want to be the dupes of these other people, or, you know, do you want to stand for yourself and other people like you? And look, there's nothing magic about it. You know that, you know, it's easier to talk about this than it is to pull off. But I think if we start addressing, we at least give them a chance to enter this conversation. You know, we at least give them a chance to maybe read themselves in a different way, right? But again, we're up against it, because this is almost the dominant storyline about race in our country, is that white men are the primary victims of all of this. So it's not going to be easy. I look at our time at 7:32. I'm happy to stay longer, but I don't like keeping people longer because people are nice and they feel like they have to stay. So I'm happy to stay a little bit longer, but if you need to sign off, you know, no hard feelings. I know that Karen is tired. So any final words, Karen?
Good night. No, thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversations. Lots to ponder.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Yeah, thank you for letting me tease you a little bit. All right. All right. But I'm happy to stay a little bit longer. So so don't feel bad about signing off if you have to. Really, it's great. I'm happy to meet all of you, and I will share a couple of pieces with Lindsay. I'll share that piece by Thandeka about, it's called Why Anti-Racism Will Fail. You know, that she's talking to her own congregation. And I'll share the one about white people scapegoating other white people to be an anti-racist. I'll share that one. And Lindsay, you can just send them out to the people that were here tonight. Any other?
Tim, I just want to say, I really thought there were just a lot of really interesting points in what you wrote. And, you know, I highlighted the kind of idea of fear as a central part of white identity. And I was just like, yeah, I mean, and just how we see this today in terms of, you know, all of the fear and how that's being mobilized politically. Yeah. So that really there were a lot of things that really made a lot of sense. And I really appreciate what you wrote. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
And I'd like to see, you know, Lindsay, I'm just going to say too, it would be nice if we'd continue to pull this thread a little bit with Timothy and with anybody else who'd want to come back on, because I think that's where we're seeing these white militias and these other groups, and the fear mongering that they're using is then perpetrated, and that continues to lead to some of the issues that we're seeing. And you know, you don't want to label, you don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, and you don't want to label everyone doing the same thing, because good Lord, my husband is so opposite of that. But we do see that. And then does that lead to people believing that it's okay to demonstrate bad behavior that is reckless and potentially harmful to others around them by inciting or raising fear and doing inappropriate things? I'm going to say that much, and I'm just going to be quiet.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way that Trump wasn't different, right? So like Trump was unique and special in some ways, but he was, in other ways, he was just extremely skilled. He was just extremely skilled at race baiting, right? At conjuring fear, right? At you know, lots of times with immigrants, right? Lots of times with whatever, the hordes of criminals and rapists that he said were coming across the border, right? I mean, he's just incredibly, whatever. I don't know if he's intelligence, but he has cunning. He certainly has cunning, and he certainly knows, but he's not the first person to do that, you know, like Thandeka in her book talks about when George Wallace doing this incredibly skillfully in Milwaukee, you know, when George Wallace was doing his presidential candidate, we see it over and over. And so I guess going back to the question about, you know, Jennifer, that you asked about working with white men, but any white students, we have to help them understand how this stuff works, how people pull it off, you know, how do they, what are they conjuring? How are they persuading us, you know, to be fearful? So, yeah.
I sort of had a question about when we were reading your book about how white people fear other white people in power, and how do we begin to take away that power of fear from, you know, law enforcement or the elite or well-to-do other white folks? I know no one has the exact answer to that, but that's something I think about a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm mostly worried just right now that it would be amazing if we got to like that point where we could have that conversation about like what we're actually up against. Like, it just feels like we're so far from that. We're so used to being directed to other people, right, as the problem, right? Like, the first presidential election I ever voted in was in 1980, you know, Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, you know. So my whole life as an educator, you know, Ronald Reagan started the whole thing with, you know, No Child Left Behind. It's just, this has just been continual. Like, we're still living out that story. And they've been, you know, conservatives have been very skilled at directing people's attention someplace else, you know. So I don't have any, I guess I do go back to history. I have to say, anytime I'm reading history, I kind of hate it and I don't know what to do with it exactly, but it just really helps. It really helps me understand kind of like how people pulled off different things. And we can flip it too. I'll try to remember to share some titles of books. On the one hand, we don't need more stories about heroic white people, you know, like often they're the only heroes, but we absolutely need to read about white anti-racists historically and the work that they did and how they did it. Because often, like, you know, like you were saying, it's hard to, Alyssa, it's hard to even imagine, right? It's just, but there are examples, and we have to pay attention and read how these people worked in solidarity with people of color, how they sustained themselves, what they tried to do. Because, you know, people have been doing it. So it's not like it's impossible. People have been doing it, so.
One thing I've been pointing people's attention to when that question comes up, like, how do we sustain this, is, first of all, look at all the people that are here that you haven't met before, right? And the numbers of people that are in on this conversation have grown exponentially. It is wild. And I know and I struggle with this too, feeling sort of overwhelmed. And like, how are we ever going to chip away at all this? Like, these are such huge baked in problems. Like, it's in our whole structures of meaning, the way that everything is sort of built. But it is heartening to see, like, okay, the choir is getting bigger. Finally, it's getting a lot bigger.
Wait, I was going to go to Joni. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I would really appreciate a book list.
Okay.
Yeah. And also, how do we get your book? Because I'd like to read the rest of it. What's the best way to get it?
Well, I was going to offer, it's fairly expensive. You can get it, like, you know, you can get it on Amazon, you can get it anywhere. But if there's I guess if Lindsay, if you're willing to organize this, I get a fairly good discount as an author. And if you could funnel through Lindsay, like like if there's like 5 copies people want, I could probably get it like I could get it to you like for $25 rather than the 33 to 40 that it is like online right now. I'll just use like the cheap mailing thing. And as long as I can just kind of mail it someplace towards Lindsay, then we could do it that way. So I could get a cheaper version to you. That be okay?
Yes, and I think Lindsay's list is getting longer, but I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll be happy to. I'll be happy to. If somebody can just send me a kind of a clump, like a number that you need, then I'll order them from the publisher, but I get it for cheaper. So pass that on. Yeah. What else? I know we've answered almost everything, but what else? Almost all has been revealed, right? So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting, Timothy, how you shared like roughly what your age is, because you know Karen was the one.
I don't have to be roughly.
Traumatized.
I'm 59. It's not roughly. I'm 59.
I know, but I mean, I was laughing because when you said when you voted,
yeah.
and Karen, I remember too, like sitting at the dining room table, and the Vietnam War news was on, or when, you know, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon and Dad popping us in front of the TV, and history is being made, and again the voting. And my husband and I were talking, because you and my husband are the same age. We were talking about remembering our first opportunity to be able to exercise our democratic rights as citizens, and going and doing that voting, and really thinking about what the issues were and what was going on, and the things we have seen since, you know, the early 80s, the late 70s, and of course before that. So I think it is really interesting, especially for the younger folks today, when you start to look at reality TV, which isn't reality. And then, you know, these heightened senses we have of depression and anxiety and other issues. And I think the bottom line is it's usually often based in fear, but what are we afraid of? You know, and so what does that all come back to when we think about all of these topics? Where is our source of fear? What's going on? Why are we rooted in fear society?
Yep, and that's, you know, Thandeka helps with that. So in the United States, we learn that race is something that everybody else has except for white people, right? So race is a category of everyone else, and white people are just humans, right? So it makes sense then when people start trying to figure out how do we solve race problems, that somehow we would look someplace else, right? That's so, and this is, you know, you see this over and over in education, you know, where somehow we start talking about the achievement gap or the education debt, and very quickly the problem somehow exists in children of color or in communities of color, right? So we have to keep reminding ourselves, you know, that this is a white problem. This is generated in our communities. This is, you know, this is a white problem. And we take up some relationship to other white people, and that relationship kind of is an engine for our relationships to people of color then. And we have to start paying attention to what's going on among ourselves. You know, and the other thing I would say, I've always been interested in how similar and different this book would be for people that live different places. And so on the one hand, you know, absolutely for people from the South that I've talked to, absolutely they can point out all sorts of ways that like a white Southern community would be different. But then they start saying, no, but there's so much that's just the same. You know, there's so much about being white that's the same in different places. And so there's great continuity. And part of it is that white people live segregated lives. It doesn't matter, like, I can't remember who said that they were from New York originally. Even in New York, white people lead segregated lives, and they think they're sophisticated if they walk past a black person on the sidewalk, right? Then they somehow live in diversity or something. But, you know, white people work and go to services and they live segregated lives. So the people in Boonendam, where I'm from, aren't so different from most, white people in the country. They're leading segregated lives. They're making up stories about who they think racial others are, right? They're responding to those stories. And like all of us, the stories have us before we have the stories, right? We're embedded in these stories before we can start figuring out where they came from and why we think the way we do, and like why we feel the way we do, right? Why we fear the things that we do. So I'm trying to bring it home. All right, so I'll take one or two more questions and then we're going to call it tonight. So anybody have a question they want to ask?
Just say goodbye, everybody.
Okay,
Great talking
bye-bye.
with everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.
I will as well. I'm going to say good night and thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure, Joni. It's nice meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, good night, likewise. Good night,
Okay,
everybody.
it seems like we're done.
We're
All right,
wrapping up.
We're wrapping up. That's good. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Okay.
Thank you.
I look forward to reading the rest of your book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye. Now we're in this weird Zoom goodbye.
I know when people are trying to leave and it's taking them a minute.
It's